Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Counternarrative Project's Revolutionary Health. We got a lot of ground to cover today. I'm going to warn you, some heavy discussions, but we're going to get through this together. So I'm really excited that you're here joining us for this discussion. I'm also with my colleague.
I'm David Malebranche. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. How are you going to what's your
I'm a
resident?
I'm not resident physician today.
You're not resident
I'm
physician.
just a doctor sitting at a table with Charles Stevens. That's all I'm doing.
As I've often said, I'm Charles. I'm the executive director of the Counternarrative Project. Johnny won't let me call myself the HNIC, so I'll just be the ED for today. Wow, we have so much ground to cover. First of all, how are you, David?
I'm doing good. I've had an interesting day.
Have you?
Dealing with passive-aggressive people and trying to get work done.
I bet y'all can't relate to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So passive-aggressive people are funny. And so I just try to not let them bother me and get a rise out of me and just keep doing my work.
Before we get in too deep, I want to give folks a few more minutes to join us.
Right.
So, relax, get comfortable, get something to drink, make yourself, because we got a lot to cover today. We're going to talk about some heavy stuff.
Yeah,
so
if you want to do wine or crown apple and pineapple juice or honey and Coke, whatever you drink.
Honey and Coke.
Henny and Coke, honey and Coke.
So let's do a roll call. Who do we have? Let's do a roll call. Who do we have so far? I see Art Jackson. Hey, Art. Walter Vinson is in the house. Hey, Walter. So yeah, definitely, relax, make yourselves comfortable. We got a lot to cover. So we're going to give folks a few more minutes to get in the room. But David, you said you're dealing with passive aggressive people today.
Yeah. Do you want me to talk about the other stuff first? Like the text that I got and the information, like literally I was on my way here. We can introduce that while people are getting there.
Okay.
So I want to throw out to the people out there. I got a text from a friend of mine who is having a surgery at some point in the near future, like within the next week or so. And he asked me if HIV testing was actually required before you go and get surgery, because the surgeon notified the staff to tell him that he was going to have to get an HIV test. They were asking him to get an HIV test before surgery. Now, my friend is HIV negative, but I guess he reported on some kind of history, or they found out that he was honest and said he had a history of syphilis in the past. So supposedly the surgeon is saying because he reported having a history of syphilis, that he wanted to make sure he was checked for HIV. My friend is also Black and gay, and so we had this elaborate discussion about whether if it was Becky, who was white and hetero, admitted that she had syphilis when she was younger, if a surgeon would be requiring her to get an HIV test, or whether the surgeon just saw him and said, Black and gay, I want to make sure it's HIV. But what it did, it brought me back to kind of the days, and I went and did a lot of research about it and looked into it and found out that the Occupational Safety and Health Guidelines, or OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they actually have guidelines, like if a surgeon cuts themselves or if a health worker sticks their finger, and kind of what you do. And what you typically do is you get an HIV test of the source patient afterwards. Like if a nurse is drawing blood on a patient and sticks his or her finger, you have to kind of wash it off. You may do post-exposure prophylaxis for HIV, which involves taking HIV medications for about a month. And then you find out from the source patient, like you get the consent for testing and you see if they're HIV positive. But I'd never heard of someone testing for HIV beforehand. It sounded very discriminatory and random. The only study I saw was from back in 95, where they interviewed a bunch of doctors, and the doctor said, oh, hell yeah, we want HIV testing before surgery because we don't know what our patients are coming in with. And that seemed outdated. Obviously, it's 23 years ago. We didn't have enough medication. We didn't have this whole undetectable, untransmittable thing that was going on. But it just struck me as a little bit interesting. So my take home was that it seems like individual level surgeons and or doctors are making their own decisions about whether they include. So when you go to get surgery or get a procedure done, they say, we're going to get pre-op labs. Usually that involves getting a blood count, checking your kidneys, your blood thinning levels. It's called a PT and a PTT. But they usually don't require you to get HIV testing as a part of that. But just be mindful, if you're getting surgery, that there are some surgeons out there that seem to be doing this arbitrarily, without any evidence, without any science, without any recommendations. So it's just an interesting thing, but it seems very discriminatory to me.
And what should someone do if they find that that's happening?
I mean, unless it's in the fine print when you're signing, it says we can test you for anything we feel like it, which a lot of these hospitals are doing now. Unless you read through the whole thing, be careful of what you're signing off on, because they are actually included when you walk into a hospital door to quote unquote normalize HIV testing, that's going to be included with all the other labs. So when you sign, you're giving consent for them not only to do the regular labs and all the other testing, but in addition, HIV is thrown in there. So, and that varies by state. And so certain states may not include that, and they have people still sign a separate consent form for HIV. But a lot of states are thinking, you know what, we're normalizing HIV. We want it to be a part of all routine care, so we're including it in there. But you can see where it's kind of, it may be being used to kind of discriminate in some cases.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or whether they've heard of anything like that, or whether their doctors have done that in the past with them, but I think it's an interesting thing to have a conversation about.
Okay, I see some other folks have joined us. I see Anthony, Antoine, just doing a little roll call for folks in the room. There's also Yakim. I'm sorry for pronouncing that wrong. But yeah, we're live. We're ready to jump in. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And let me just say a little bit. So much of the spirit of revolutionary health is about topics like that, to talk about health, not just about individual behaviors, but about the larger structural considerations that very much shape the environment that we exist in, particularly as Black gay men.
Right.
So I really appreciate you sharing that story, because there's so many stories like that about discrimination in the healthcare setting.
Yeah, and it's something that just came up. So I think, when these things come up, I try to, we both try to vocalize them depending on what's going on.
Yeah. So. Hey, Jay Anderson Lester. See, Jay Anderson's joined us. Also, as always, in the comments, feel free to let us know what you think, topics, questions you have for us that you want us to discuss. Just let us know what you're feeling. And also, please make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube, and also like the video on Facebook or YouTube. Finally, come join our CNP tribe, right?
Yes.
So make sure you go to the counternarrative.org to get on our email list. All right. So I see 4 of y'all in here, but I don't think I see 4 likes. Okay, I see 5 likes. All right. I'm calling y'all out now. All right. So let's just get started. Wow. I guess we should begin with Michael Johnson.
Okay.
So this is kind of breaking news, y'all. As I said, this is going to be a pretty heavy evening. We have a lot of stuff to get through, a lot of stuff to talk about. One of the things is Michael Johnson, who many of us have been following, certainly. BuzzFeed, and I got to give a shout out to Stephen Thrasher, who's just done amazing reporting. Brother Stephen Thrasher's just done some incredible reporting on Michael Johnson. So, but according to BuzzFeed, Michael Johnson, the collegiate wrestler known as Tiger Mandingo, who was originally sentenced to more than 30 years in prison for reckless. So Michael Johnson has been granted parole, his lawyers told BuzzFeed News. However, Johnson will remain incarcerated at the Boonville Correctional Facility until October 9th, 2019. And this is basically 6 years after he was initially arrested for and put behind bars for, again, air quotes, knowingly exposing or transmitting HIV to male partners. So I just want to give a shout out to Stephen Thrasher for his amazing
Well done.
reporting. Let me also say, I'm honestly kind of ambivalent about the use of Tiger Mandingo in the media. I think people that know me know that that's something I've been pretty vocal about, just my ambivalence about like the whole Tiger Mandingo thing. And, but that's not neither here nor there for this current conversation. But the reason why we want to discuss this is obviously we can't talk about health without talking about, again, the structural and social considerations of health, including discrimination against, people living with HIV.
Right.
HIV stigma is so real, especially as it impacts our community. So, but, I'm glad that Michael is going to get parole.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, the one thing, Charles is being a little bit humble here, but Charles was spearheading a lot of the activism that was kind of working on getting awareness about Michael Johnson's case, what was happening with him and how unfair everything was. So Stephen Thrasher, great job on the writing, but also kudos to Charles for really taking the mantle and picking the torch up and kind of carrying this to make sure that the injustices that were done to Michael.
And wait a minute though, David, because kudos to you too, because when we were doing, I don't know if folks know this, I got to give a little history about this. So as part of the solidarity efforts with Michael, we wanted to do an open letter from Black gay men, just really expressing our love and support of Michael. And I really think that letter that over 100 Black gay men signed was like a turning point in the campaign for a number of reasons. I think most critically, I think it put a lot of people on notice that had been sort of ignoring Michael and had not really been doing a whole lot. Right. It showed that Michael had a community standing behind him. Right. And David, oh my God, you're like one of the first people that took the letter, signed it. Like I was, because when I was proposing it to people in terms of signing on to this open letter to Michael, I wasn't sure how people would land. And I mean, you were like, when you put that letter on your Facebook, oh my God, it was like so many people. Yeah, it's like you put your social capital.
Yeah, it was good. I just think, the Michael Johnson case, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it, there's obviously a lot of stuff on the internet that you can look up about his case, but it really mixed in a lot of issues of race, racism, kind of HIV discrimination, criminalization laws, and kind of masculinity, hookup apps, those kind of things, privacy, all this kind of stuff, consent, disclosure of HIV status in consensual relationships. All these issues were kind of being mixed around in a very like a perfect storm kind of thing. And he got thrown under the bus as kind of the scapegoat of all this. And I think because of his case, there's been a lot of mobilization around changing some of the HIV criminalization laws, if not eradicating them altogether. And so it's good to hear, but he's been in prison for 6 years now.
He's been he was arrested, so he was in jail, and then
he was in jail back then, and then he went to prison. So he's served 6 years already. And so, having him get out next year will be a good thing, because I think they'd given him like a 30-year sentence, something like
initially,
that. It was ridiculous.
It was like a whole, but definitely check out Stephen Thrasher's reporting on Michael Johnson. Definitely just amazing reporting. And also, if we talk about the letter, I need to definitely make sure I shout out Kenneth Pass, this amazing student at Northwestern, just incredible. Kenneth actually led the crafting of the letter, right. And I want to make sure that, graduate of Morehouse College, currently a student at Northwestern, a PhD program, and amazing soul. So I see a few other folks joining us. David, a lot of people are saying hey to you.
Hey,
I want to highlight Anthony is in the comments. Hey, Anthony. Anthony says, I experienced stigma with a close friend who was confirmed HIV negative, but 3 different doctors told him he must be HIV positive, once in front of me, and after an earlier doctor confirmed his negative status just the day before. Check the chart. Stop being lazy because you're treating working with Black gay men. Oh my God. And please, in the comments, thank you, Anthony, for sharing that. Feel free to share some of your experiences in the healthcare setting. I think I don't know if we talked about this. I had the experience. I went to the doctor with my partner almost a year ago. He was going to do, what do you call it? Like minor surgery. Mm-hmm. And it was so interesting how the staff at Johns Hopkins, Emory Hospital were treating us, and it wasn't like harsh stigma, but it's like they didn't quite know what to
do.
Yeah, 2 Black men, that side. It's like they had never seen a Black gay couple before. So it was just really interesting.
Right. And it happens, unfortunately. So I think there's a lot of levels that the medical profession can discriminate.
Absolutely.
And that whole thing about, someone arbitrarily requiring you to get an HIV test before surgery is just one of those avenues that they do that.
So. Absolutely. This isn't perhaps directly related to health, but directly, explicitly related to health, but David and I just thought it was important to just kind of check in. And that's really about Timothy Cunningham. I know a lot of folks have been talking about Timothy Cunningham. It's definitely made its way all through social media. There's just a lot of unanswered questions. And the AJC, they actually have a piece just kind of breaking down the facts, like what we know and what's still unknown. Mm-hmm. And so just to give you a little background. So Timothy Cunningham, his body was discovered. Tragic, it was all very tragic and really heartbreaking. A fisherman spotted his body Tuesday night in the Chattahoochee River. So I guess like last Tuesday. It was in a remote area, not easily accessible, according to firefighters. Right. The body was face up in muddy water, and I'm just going to warn you, some of this is kind of graphic. Right. Medical examiners used dental records to identify the body as Timothy Cunningham, and an autopsy found no signs of trauma or evidence of underlying medical condition, and drowning is believed to be the cause of death. Cunningham was found 4 miles from his home and was wearing his favorite running shoes, but he did not have his house keys, he did not have his cell phone, or any other personal items. Cunningham also knew how to swim, so that also makes the drowning just seem very precarious. Mm-hmm. What we don't know. So we don't know okay, so according to the AJC, this is what we don't know. Did Cunningham leave his home and intend not to return? And I know we talked about that right before we started the live. How did he end up in the river, and where did he access it? And was the drowning an accident, or was it intentional? So those are just some of the questions that are lingering. And I mean, ultimately, we wanted to just kind of raise this because, well, we was also talking about loneliness like last week.
Right.
And, I'm not trying to speculate or anything about Timothy Cunningham. Like, that's not what this is about. But we just wanted to just kind of hold space and just realize that there are people that, I know this is going to be triggering for folks. And so we just kind of wanted to like hold space for that. And just realizing that a lot of people have a lot of feelings, and it's probably very triggering for a number of reasons for people.
Yeah, and I think it's really sad. My condolences go out to his family, especially what they went through, because it was about 4 weeks that he was missing, maybe more than that. And they had to deal with that uncertainty before they found out what's going on. And so hopefully all his friends and family, can be somewhat comforted about knowing at least some of what happened, and that there's some resolution to it. But it's just, I think for me, you're talking about how to tie it into, Black men's health, Black gay men's health. And I don't know, I don't speculate about Timothy's sexual orientation, so I don't know anything about that. But I think one of the underlying themes, regardless, is about checking in on one another. And I think the narrative I was seeing a lot in social media and among my friend circles were that, oh, this brother really had it all together. He was CDC, epidemiologist, good looking cat, had his stuff together, well educated. And I think we have that thing all the time that's a common trope that we talk about with the counter narrative a lot, is that, there are these, a lot of us as Black gay men, people look at us from the outside and think, oh, you have this position, or you're doing this. And so everything is together, and we tend not to check on each other. And so there are times when, all of a sudden you find out somebody died, or someone had surgery, or someone went through some medical thing, and you're like, oh my God, like, what happened? I didn't know that happened. Or, oh my God, how could that have happened to him? And it's one of those things where we kind of isolate ourselves. We get into our own thing. We don't let other people know about some of the medical conditions we may have. We don't let other people know about the stresses and the mental health issues we may be facing, or what may be going on. And again, I'm not saying that Timothy was going through any of those things, but it just brought to me some of those ideas about, how we don't know about each other unless we check in with each other, and unless we take time to kind of say, how are you doing? What's going on? Is everything okay? Those kind of questions. Even if you think somebody is the strongest person on the face of this planet, they need to be checked in as well.
And so that's our charge. Like, Counternarrative Family, I'm charging you, make sure that you check on people this week. Check if there's somebody that's been in your life that you haven't heard from, or somebody in the community that you haven't seen around. Please check on them. Please check on them. Even if just sending a text or just a Facebook message or whatever. Ideally call, if you can call, or even like have coffee.
Strongest ones.
Especially the strongest ones.
The people that you think are the ones that are always taking care of everyone else, or the people that never complain and just do for everyone else. Check up on them. How are you doing? Are you okay? And I guarantee you that person will try to switch the conversation back onto you. They'll be like, you say, hey, how are you doing? They'll be like, I'm good. How are you?
David, I'm right here. How are you going to throw shade at me?
No, it's not you, but it's not but they won't want to take that on because they don't want to talk about their own self, so they put it right back on you. And actually, I wasn't even thinking about you, but now that you're saying it, you're right. You actually do that. But like, I have a lot of other friends that are really nurturers, and they take care of everyone else. So when you ask them and check up, I think folks get surprised. And there are a lot of Black gay men out there. We're taking care of our families. We're in our house. We're serving as uncle to our nieces and nephews. We're caretakers for our parents. We're financial, people we're the coworker that's always available when so-and-so has to pick up her kids for the dance recital or the ballet recital. So we deal with a lot of things. And so the reflex is when someone says, gee, how are you doing? You usually just say, oh, I'm good. How are you? And then bring it back to you, because they're so surprised that someone's actually checking in on them. So if you have a friend like that and they give you that reflex, push back, oh, I'm good. How are you? Don't let them do it. Say, okay, tell me more. Like, shut up with that. Like, I'm talking really, how are you doing? Is everything okay?
Wow.
Or is there anything stressing you out? And then you'll see sometimes those walls kind of come down a little bit, but you have to push a little bit, but it's worth the effort, especially with someone that you care about.
Absolutely. And I find that there's this sort of intellectualization of vulnerability, and it's sort of like all these very heady conversations about, oh, we need to be vulnerable, but that's to me where the rubber meets the road. Like, can you actually have that conversation. Like,
Right.
can you reach out to someone and really check on them and ask how, and genuinely mean it?
Right.
I think that can make such a huge difference.
And how can they be vulnerable if you don't check in on them?
Absolutely.
And if they're used to, if their role in everyone's life is always being the strong one, they don't know. Maybe they're not wired to be vulnerable, and they don't know how it's done or how it's supposed to be operationalized. So their reflex is just, I'm gonna check on everybody else. So check on your friends, everybody.
Yeah, check on them. That's the assignment. Check on your friends. Check on even people again, even people on the community, that, because I think that happens a lot too, where you'll be a part of an organization or you'll be a part of a group, and there's somebody that's really active and they're there all the time, and then they just stop coming, they stop showing up.
Right.
And a lot of times we don't even inquire about them. It's like we just let it go. So I think that's so important. I see Walter. I want to shine some light on Walter. He's made a point about the early discussion we're having about the discrimination.
Right.
And Walter says, when I was in culinary school, the board had to have a meeting about me and my HIV status. They had never knowingly had a positive student. They weren't sure if it was 100% safe having me in the teaching kitchen in case I cut myself. I wound up having to educate and inform them. They ultimately just wanted to avoid any lawsuits or liabilities, but I was just trying to get an education and not let my status be a deterrent. Thank you so much, Walter, for sharing that. Thank you, Walter.
I think we have to keep pushing back when that happens.
We have to keep pushing back.
So whether you're living with HIV, whether you're not, and someone's just discriminating against you because you're Black and gay, and they're making all kinds of assumptions, we have to push back about those systems, because those systems are put in place by people, and they respond if someone says, I'm going to sue you, or you're discriminating against me. You need to change that. You bring a lawyer into the case, and all of a sudden you see how quickly policies can change. But it usually only takes one person to be able to do that. So don't think you have to be on the board or you have to get a whole petition together. It usually can just be you if you're motivated. So good job, Walter.
Good job. Another topic that I wanted us to address was...
Your voice got real low.
It got real low.
It's about to get real heavy.
What? Junot Diaz wrote this beautiful essay in the New Yorker, and he shared an experience about being raped as a young boy. And I know on my Facebook and social media, it opened up a lot of conversations about involuntary sexual debut and just the range of ways that particularly boys of color are vulnerable to sexual violence in various forms, and not really being much of a discussion around that, although it's increasingly obviously been the case. David, I know you've done a lot of research, or you've done research on black gay boys and being a molestation. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of literature out there. The study that I published, it was a while ago. It was probably about 12 or 13 years ago, with Sheldon Fields. Shout out to Sheldon, and Sonia Feast-Price, who was at the University of Kentucky at the time. We all did 3 separate qualitative studies with different samples of Black gay men. I think Sonia's was bisexual. Sheldon's was a little bit younger in New York, and mine was kind of middle-aged, like 30s to 40s in Atlanta. And we weren't even asking about childhood sexual abuse specifically, but we found that in each of our samples, which was about 30 men apiece, that about 30% of the sample, 1/3 of the sample, reported having a history of childhood sexual abuse. And we published the data, we kind of pulled everything together, but then when we started to look at some of the literature that we saw, there wasn't much out there specifically with Black gay men, but then we started to see more quantitative studies come around that were saying anywhere from 15% to 30% to 40% in some situations. And I can tell you, even as you were saying this, it just reminded me anecdotally, I recently came across a brother who was a patient of mine, and it was billed as a visit to me to just give some positive sexually transmitted infection lab result. So it was like, oh, you have to give this lab result, you'll treat him, blah, 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 blah. And then when I started talking to him, he started to explain to me that he had been abused recently within the past year, and then had been sexually assaulted multiple times when he was a child. And I didn't want to let him go because we wanted to address that. And I had one of the therapists come over and kind of sit down and talk with him and get him plugged in. But it was already traumatizing enough that he had this STI diagnosis, and he was now going to get treatment. He was happy that it was a curable STI, but you imagine the trauma of going through that and then it kind of opening up some other stuff. And the amazing thing about it was that he kept saying to me, I'm okay. It's all good. I kind of went through some depression, but I'm okay. Wow. And he kept pushing it off like it wasn't a problem, and then telling me all the shit that he had been through. And I was like, dude, you've been through a lot. Like, have you talked to anybody about it? And he was like, no, I'm good. And he had all these plans kind of laid out. And I was thinking to myself, like, the walls we put up to kind of guard against this, and to deny that this happened, and to kind of suppress it when we can, especially all that stems from when, a lot of us will go through sexual abuse and then go to a parent, mother or a father or a relative, and say, hey, so-and-so abused me. And the parent will say, no, you're lying, you're not telling the truth, and then turn them away. So I've heard a lot of stories, both in research settings, clinical settings, as well as with friends of mine, where they've had similar situations. And it's not just a one-time deal. Like, the sexual abuse that goes on with a lot of Black gay men that we see is repeated. And it's usually a family member that's the perpetrator. It's not somebody that is not available, or it's not some kind of like forensic files or some kind of, romanticized Law and Order SVU episode where it's some stranger that does it. It's a family member that has close access, has gained trust, that the family all loves. And when this child is trying to say, hey, look, I'm being abused, everyone says, no, that can't be, so-and-so family member is such a good person. They would never do anything like that. And so the child carries that trauma and then learns through learned conditioning to basically say, no one's going to listen to me. Why do I say anything? And then they show up in our offices. And there's a lot of literature that talks about victims of childhood sexual abuse have higher risk for HIV later on. Sexual behavior wise, may have more sexual partners, some other things. So the laundry list goes on about how traumatic these events are and how they lead to behaviors as adulthood, especially when we don't cope with them or we try to suppress them and act like they don't happen. And then all of a sudden it will just come up out of the blue and in the strangest of moments. I even had a friend of mine who is a little bit older than I am, who disclosed to me that he had been abused when he was a child, and it just came up in some kind of random situation when he was going through some other stuff, and he had suppressed it for so long he forgot that it even happened. So these things do happen, and they get triggered at the slightest of things. So again, kind of the importance of checking in on one another, making sure if you see something wrong with one of your adopted biological family members. That's what that's what I would call ourselves. Yeah. Like the brothers that you adopt as your family, your brothers, your uncles, your nephews, your sons, your dads, in these gay families that we create. Like, check in on each other when something seems a little bit strange, or when they're acting a little bit funny, or even when they're not. Just be able to say, like, hey, I'm checking in. Is everything okay? Or has that ever happened to you? If a topic comes up, and like asking each other the same way. Like, sometimes you say, nobody asked me if I'm on PrEP, or what am I doing? Like, no one checks in on that. If you think we're not asking you about PrEP, I was raped at 6 years of age or 8 years of age, and that was a very powerful essay. I didn't get to read the whole thing. I want to go back to it, but I read about half of it, and it was beautifully written and haunting, because of what he was going through and kind of what he was having to grapple with.
And I think another issue that we don't talk a lot about is the ways that I think a lot of Black gay boys are targeted in a way, like there's like a surveillance, and it's like, I don't think you're always aware that you're being, especially, and maybe it's a Southern thing, but, looking back, and I've had this conversation with other friends, it's like, you just feel so surveilled and so targeted and so visible, and like, adults are watching you. They're like paying attention, and they're checking you out. And I think that's where a lot of it happens. Like, I think there's something that where, like, I think sometimes Black gay boys are kind of preyed upon, because they're maybe seen as being like maybe disconnected, or they might be able to take advantage of, like, they might be perceived as like being bullied, and that can be an entry point. So there's all this stuff. Like, I'll never forget when I was 12 years old, there was a family friend, I guess you could say, a minister actually, and he wanted me to spend the night with him. Like, I was like 12, and he wanted me to spend the night. And he was like really smart. He was like this sort of intellectual, brilliant man, so smart. And I was like just completely captivated by that, because he knew all this stuff about the Bible, and I was like a little church boy back then. And I told my mama that he wanted me to spend the night, like asked if I could spend the night. And to me, it seemed completely innocent. I was like, oh, he just want. My mom was like, nope, nope. She was like,
You think she knew?
And I think she discerned some stuff that I couldn't discern quite yet.
Right.
Or maybe she was just like, why would you spend no.
With a grown ass
You
man.
just not, well, he was married and
Right.
And then later on, so there's a more backstory that I won't tell right now, but nonetheless, my mother was like, no. And I think about that intervention, like how many, what if she hadn't said no? What if she hadn't? And so, yeah, it's like, there's just a vulnerability to like, I think a lot of Black people, especially in the South, and I'm just constantly reminded of that.
Right. But it's very traumatic, and I think there are a lot of brothers that go around and struggle with it every day. I think the first thing a lot of us need to do, if you're struggling with that, is reach out to a friend, or like we're saying before, check in on our friends and see if some of that. But for the victims who have gone through this, like it takes a lot of strength to disclose to a family member or even your best friend. Like it's so traumatic because it opens up a whole bunch.
Or partner.
Yeah, or partner and someone. Yeah, because it impacts like how you interact sexually, romantically, intimacy, how that's defined for you, how sex is operationalized for you, where you like it, what you don't like doing, what you do like doing, if certain touches bother you, like those kind of things can happen. But the conversations need to be had for some of that healing to begin. And so it's just a very challenging thing. But I never underestimate the trauma that a lot of brothers have gone through, being victims of childhood sexual abuse, and how hard it is to discuss that. People carry these secrets with them for years, decades. So we have to make the culture one that's a little bit more open to talking about these kind of things, not as judgmental, and more supportive.
Walter says the psychological ramifications of childhood sexual assault has a myriad of after effects and doesn't have one look. Promiscuity and drug use for some, but by no means the only. Thank you, Walter.
Absolutely, Walter.
Yakeem says, unfortunately, families of color typically do not encourage or respect and understanding towards mental health. It's most definitely learned and difficult to rectify. But yeah, I mean, so much of the work of the Counternarrative Project is just really about having the conversation and creating space. So please, let's just continue having a conversation. Let's continue to make these issues visible, because I think it saves lives when you're able to share these stories. The final topic that I would hope that we discuss is about shade. I just had this provocative thought. I was like, what are the ramifications of shade? It's like become kind of like a sort of right? Like it's in pop culture. It's like everyone's throwing shade, But I'm like, well, what does it really mean? Like, what do we mean by that? And like, what are the implications? So, to give you some more context, thank you, David Watson, for liking the video. So many of us, I think, go into community thinking it's going to be like this very affirming, like, we show up and it's like, oh, Charles is here. When you first come into, especially Black gay community, a lot of us think that it's going to be, got like your cheers or something.
There's a big party, there's balloons.
A parade maybe, like you've arrived.
Absolutely. You came out. Congratulations.
Congratulations. You get an orientation packet. It's like, but that's not really the experience for all of us, right? Many of us might experience a kind of, we might perceive ourselves experiencing like rejection when we first start entering Black, especially social spaces, or even online, really. Like, I think to talk about shit is also to talk about rejection, in a sense, like a sort of feeling of collective rejection. And one of the things I understand about Black gay men, and even myself included, is that we are very sensitive to social rejection. We are extremely, don't not remember somebody's name, don't remember, like, we're very sensitive. And it's very triggering for us, obviously, because I think so many of us come from, that's so much a part of our journey. And, I've seen like sort of like some organizations try to do stuff like, oh, this is going to be a shade-free zone and stuff like that. But I don't think we've ever really kind of wrapped our brains around like what it means to really create affirming spaces. And not just, and so I just wanted to have a little discussion about that. Like, what are your thoughts?
My thought,
do you throw shade?
Well, no, I don't know if I'm as good as shade, but I do think what's interesting is that generationally, and now in this day and age, it's not just generation. So I wouldn't just say millennials are, taking shade to another level. They could be.
Don't start nothing.
But who knows? But like baby boomers throw shade, Generation X throw shade, millennials throw shade. I just think it's the venue through which the shade is thrown. Like back in the day, it would be an epic beatdown at the club, or on the streets
Yeah.
or outside or in a restaurant or whatever the venue may be, that you do it to somebody's face. Now the shade is all thrown through the internet. And so whether you throw somebody shade on Jack'd or Grindr, or you throw somebody shade on Instagram, Snapchat, or Facebook, or whatever it is, people do that. I think for me, we all have times where we get very defensive.
Yes.
If we feel like someone's coming for you, you're automatically gonna fight back. It's like we could be cornered animals because we're used to being traumatized. We're used to being ridiculed, or used to being discriminated against. So we get a whiff of that, especially from one of our own. We're just gonna lash out immediately, and so it becomes very hurtful. Yeah. And I think the thing for me is that I remember a long time ago, there used to be a magazine called Arise magazine.
Oh, Arise. I wrote for them one time.
Exactly. So shout out to Glenn Alexander and MacArthur Flournoy, who created that amazing. And they asked me, I did a health column for them.
Arise.
And yeah, Arise, exactly. And at one point, they wanted to discuss like coming out of the closet or coming into a Black gay community. What does that mean? And I wrote, the title of the piece that I wrote was Coming Out to What? And so I was questioning kind of, what are people coming out to? And I don't believe in coming out of the closet as kind of that social paradigm that everybody makes it out to be. I think it's got a lot of flaws. And I think people can just be who they are and disclose or invite people in, as Darnell Moore said, about inviting someone into your space rather than coming out of something that's automatically deemed as pathological. But I also thought we're encouraging all these people to disclose their sexual orientation, to tell everybody that they're gay. And if you do the kind of white gay Dan Savage thing and say, what's this famous slogan? It gets better. And it doesn't always get better. So with all due respect to Dan Savage, like, you can't just do a little catchphrase and say, oh, honey, just come out of the closet, it's going to get better. Because for a lot of Black gay children, there are a lot more important things that are going on in our lives outside of just coming out of the closet. And then if you come out of the closet and say you're not of the typical kind of masculine, skinny, aesthetic, cute boy aesthetic that everybody has, you're coming out to a whole lot of discrimination, a whole lot of bullshit, a whole lot of ridicule, a whole lot of shade. And so, what are we telling people to come out to? Should the message be to come out of the closet, or somehow find a space where you can be affirmed of your sexuality so you feel comfortable in that? Because this kind of rote thing of just saying, come out of the closet, I don't really know what that means anymore. And if what we're coming out of the closet to is so shady and kind of full of a lot of negativity, but sometimes I see some people like not wanting to quote unquote come out, whatever that means at all, because they'd rather spend time with their friends or by themselves rather than put themselves through the shade and ridicule and the games and the quick queen snaps that a lot of people will do in the gay community that we have.
I guess for me, I guess I was like really committed to building a community that affirmed me. Mm-hmm. Like, I hear so many stories, especially, from brothers in Atlanta and DC and New York and all those places about how, how horrible the scene is and how, and all that. And it's something I hear a lot, and how difficult it is navigating it.
Right.
But I think, from the time I was 18 years old, I just was like, I wanted to find a tribe that I felt affirmed me and valued me.
How did you do that? Like, how did you?
A lot of it was
to do that.
A lot of it was well, I wanted to survive, right. And I was definitely, I always talk about how, like, for a lot of activists, you see them on the other side, and they act like they've always been these sort of like Black men loving Black men, like super activisty, but we ain't always, we've all had our journeys. Right. I remember praying that I wasn't gay and like struggling with it and thinking I was going to go to hell. So I'm like, I know what it's like to come out of that, right, and to be in that space. So for me, once I got out of that, I was like, I'm gonna be happy. Like, I'm gonna find joy. So I really started to, and it was trial and error. Like, I even stuff like, I didn't want to have friends that belittled me. Right. Like, I think in a lot of spaces, and I by no means do I think it's specific to Black community, but I'm always alarmed, if not appalled, at the normalization of like the sort of verbal abuse. Like, it's like, I'm just like, really, y'all just playing, but you just said, none of that. I was like, I'm not having that.
Right.
And so I just started making choices about like wanting friends that like inspired me and built me up, and and being around community. So I don't know, like, I just think that everyone's journey is their own journey, but
how would you tell, like, supposing there's some young brothers in some rural areas or some areas where they're not affirmed, where they don't have a lot of other Black gay men who are out there, and they know that some of the things that they see in these social spaces are just kind of catty or racist or homophobic, or if it is a Black gay community, it's very shady. Like, what advice would you give them as far as what they can do to kind of get out of that? Because you seem to be very intentional about your stuff.
Well, let me be clear.
Internal locus with that. But
let me be clear. It wasn't always perfect. I mean, there's always
it's not saying it's perfect, but for somebody who's watching.
I think self-awareness is the most important thing that you can have. And if something doesn't feel good, change it. If you can, or at least start the process so I realize that, you can't always immediately change your surroundings,
right,
but start a process.
Right.
Sometimes surrounding yourself with things that are affirming are I was so obsessed with finding even messages in books and online stuff. Like I remember when I was 18 years old, reading about the National Black Lesbian and Gay Leadership Forum. And I just was really trying to find anything that affirmed me or inspired me, writers, music, and that's kind of where it starts. Sometimes, I think for a lot of us, before we are able to find people community, we find music community. So they're singers or artists that resonate for us. So we find writer community. I remember, I'll never forget when I sort of came out, I was 18, and I, because I don't do nothing small, I came out publicly in the media. And after that, I was like, what the hell did I just do? And I picked up a copy of Brother to Brother, edited by Essex and Phil, and just started reading it. And it made me feel like what I did was right, or it felt good.
Right.
But everybody's journey is different.
Right.
Oh, we have some comments. Let me just hold up some comments. Yakim says, admittedly, there are a lot of gay men that glorify shady behavior, but I think that just boils down to who you choose to be around. If you find that someone is constantly negative towards you or other people, then you know they are not for you. Rudeness and disrespect, especially if we don't have a genuinely playful relationship, is not cute. Exactly.
That's great
exactly.
advice.
That's amazing advice.
If it doesn't feel right, step away from it. I think a lot of people who watch, I remember myself, dealing with a lot of people that were verbally abusive or just negative all the time. And it's hard to walk away, especially when there's a certain level of comfort.
And they'll gaslight you too.
Yeah.
Why are you being so sensitive?
Yeah. Why you have a level of investment in people. There are certain people that are there they're trying to tear you down. So if it doesn't feel right, or if it isn't something you would do to somebody else because it's mean and hurtful, step away from it. Just know that you have the agency to do that.
Absolutely. Walter says, I'm gay, but I am a black and a geek. I'm black and I'm a geek first.
Come on, Black.
That's what I bond with my friends on. All right, the blurred community. Can
Come
I just say
on,
that
Blurred.
I was I'm the OG of
Blurred.
I'm the OG of the black nerds. I was doing it before it was cute. But thank y'all so much for being with us this evening. This was a good conversation.
It was.
Thank you for the comments. Love y'all so much. As always, please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Definitely like us on Facebook, and join our email list at thecounternarrative.org, so you can stay connected to the CNP tribe. David, do you have any closing?
Nah, just send any ideas, any thoughts, comments, topics you want to cover.
What y'all want us to talk about next week?
Yeah, let us know. We can kind of write that down, scribble that down for next week. But Tuesdays at 7 p.m.
Tuesdays at 7 p.m.
Unless something happens and one of us is not going to be around, one of the three of us won't be around, or two of the three of us won't be around.
The power of three.
Power of three. But
thank you, Johnny. Johnny's in the background. Johnny's our amazing. He's just a man. Has it all going on back there. Thank you. Get it, Johnny. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Talk to y'all later.
See you next week.